Hello to all you tokers out there in podcast land, and welcome to episode 71 of Canadian Patriot Podcast, the number one podcast in Canada. Recorded on Monday, April 20th, 2017. We're not actually going to talk about weed tonight, but we are going to talk about gun laws. Joining me, we have Gavin. Gavin's a content provider for Toxic Kodiak Pathfinders. We have Marty. Marty's a hunter and sport shooter from rural southern Ontario. Nolan, the proprietor of Matador Arms. My name is Andrew, and I'm a firearms instructor at Ragnarok Tactical.
Then we'd love to hear your feedback about the show, so please visit CanadianPatriotPodcast.com/feedback or email us at feedback@CanadianPatriotPodcast.com. If you use the iTunes, you can leave a 5-star review there, and when you do, put something in the comments that you'd like me to drink for an episode. Also, preferably, you should probably listen to the show high, because then you might like it a little bit more.
Unfortunately, the podcast has a Facebook page that you can come check us out. It's facebook.com/Canadian Patriot Podcast. You could give us a like, and we'll let you know when new episode airs and when we're live on YouTube, which is Monday nights at 9, except for tonight. So if you aren't a member following us on the Facebooks, you probably have no idea that we are here live tonight. Also, you can check out the Instagram.com/Canadian Patriot Podcast. Remember to use hashtag bayonets out for Harambe.
That and we need your help. To support the show, visit www.patreon.com/CPP and become a Patreon. You can get the uncensored audio version of the show for just $1 per episode. The more you pledge, the cooler rewards are. If you leave $2 an episode, I will personally draw you a picture hanging out with the shiny pony. Maybe smoking a joint, maybe having a drink, maybe punching him in the face. Who knows?
And I believe one of the tiers gets you an official Tim's Good Tea.
It's true. They're quite good.
All right, let's quickly run down what are we drinking tonight. We'll start with Gavin. Gavin, what are you drinking?
I am drinking Four Roses again this evening because there's still a little left over in the bottle from the other night.
Likewise, myself. I'm still doing this other Jerry and finishing off that bottle.
Nice.
Oh, Sailor Jerry's good stuff.
I've become a big fan.
What do you have, Nolan? You drinking yet?
Eldorado rum, the 12-year-old.
Nice.
So kind of a staple.
All right, and we have a special edition of the show tonight. This is going to be short and probably not sweet. We're talking about the Arms Trade Treaty, which we have now acceded to as Canadians because the government decided to stop putting it off, which is unfortunate in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, this is a failure of the Conservative Party that we're here today.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Conservative Party not securing the previous election is why we have a podcast, but also their inaction at the UN is why we have the Arms Trade Treaty.
Which normally we agree to inaction at the UN, but in this case, not so much.
I kind of think that the main problem with it is our Export Act is already as robust as anything else anybody else has, so there's not really a point to this, I of course I'm biased. I would have agreed with the Conservatives. There wasn't really a need to do this because we can, the government can ban any sort of export to any potentially unfriendly neighbor or unfriendly nation. So
first off, let me correct you, because as of Bill C-47, we no longer have an Export and Import Permits Act. We have now changed the name, or will be changing the name if this goes through, from the simple Export and Import Permits Act, which is extremely clear as to what it is. Our new name is an act representing the export, transfer, and brokering of goods and technology and the import of goods.
Yeah. When you actually, I mean,
wow.
That is another huge issue with this is, regardless of what you think about the Arms Trade Treaty, we've just kind of adopted this law, which when you sit down and read the text of it, basically just says we're going to adopt whatever they say, like it doesn't really spell anything out in the law like typically our laws do or as a sovereign country somebody would make a law. It basically just says we're going to do what they say and the RCMP and CBSA will enforce it.
Okay, so I was really confused about that when I read the proposed act. It's an act, right? That's what it's going to be.
Oh, it's all an act.
Well, yeah, it is the, what was formerly the Export and Permits Act, but was introduced with Bill C-47, which was introduced Friday of last week.
The same day as they did the marijuana law, but
yeah, I think it was Friday of last week.
What a coincidence!
No,
that it was the
Thursday.
same day as the marijuana.
It was Thursday. It was the day before the long weekend.
Yeah, good news, everyone, and we'll just slip this over here. So
yeah. Everyone's cheering the pot laws that they now have, which don't actually legalize it so much as highly regulated. But I guess that's a topic for Monday.
Yeah, that's a problem for Monday.
But it provided some excellent smokescreen for passing this one through.
Oh.
But I can't confess to being a legal beagle or anything like that, but I'm not really aware of any other laws that we've really enacted where it's basically completely and utterly at the behest of someone else. I mean, maybe some of the, human trafficking or something like that in the criminal code, but this law in essence, like there's no, and I was looking at it from a business sense saying like, oh, okay, what type of permit would we need to hold or look into, or what are they considering regulated goods? And in the law that, C-47 that we are going to adopt, there's no details. Just,
No. That was the thing that struck me when I read through it. It's like 20 pages of nothing in both official languages. It's literally 20 pages of nothing.
Yeah, but that way they just make it up as they go, right? Like,
well, but
there's no details.
That's what they've done.
That's what Nolan's point was there, though. Is it said we're going to go along with what the UN is telling us to do, but it doesn't stipulate what that is, what the controlled products are or are not, what permits are required or are not, what the associated schedules of fees might be. There's no information about what the actual permitting will be.
Yep, that's because Dear Leader wants his shiny trophy, and the only way that he's going to get it is by just bending over and doing what the UN wants.
Well, which is a very valid possibility. There were a couple of things that came out of this that I see as massive government overreach into private businesses and into private property rights. Nolan, I think you were looking more on the export side. I was looking at stuff coming into the country and how the marking regulations are going to impact Canadian firearms importers.
Yeah,
so before we go too far, I'll just highlight in terms of what we were just talking about in sort of handing away that sovereignty. So the new verbiage that has been added is, conditions that are based on approvals, classifications, determinations made by specified persons or specified government entities, including foreign government entities. Mm-hmm. So this entire act is sort of at the whim of, whoever we agree with, or whoever the current government agrees with internationally. But
I'm
essentially,
not okay with that.
Foreign governments have the ability to determine whether or not, or who, essentially what countries and what materials we import and export. That's what this, C-47 adds into us.
Yeah, it's like, it's not clear. I mean, we import stuff and we export stuff, and as it stands now, I mean, the old system under the Export Act was, relatively clear and surprisingly efficient. But at least you knew what you had to do. Here, like, what do you do? That's kind of.
Well, yeah, you don't even know if you need to fill out paperwork because you don't know if it's a controlled good or not. Like,
yeah, and usually at the point where you find out you did not do the paperwork correctly or something else was required is when you've already stepped in the big brown steaming pile and they're out to get you. That's when you figure out, oh yeah, I guess we needed, we have to file that. How are you supposed to know this stuff? So the one that in that whole thing, the thing that worries me is we're just, again, the law's not clear, but we're just saying it's totally up to the RCMP and CBSA to enforce this. Since the law is not clear, it's also up to them to interpret it. So
we also know how
goes wrong when the RCMP interprets law.
Nothing can go wrong there. Yeah. I mean, but what could possibly happen? So
they should just stick to wearing their jodhpurs and riding horses and not interpreting law.
Well, but it's any government agency is obviously tempted by that massive power of being able to interpret what they think is right. And if the law's not there, if it's not clear, like how they can just basically do whatever they want. So when you've got 6 pallets coming into the country or a container, and it lands, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, turns out that someone in
great Nolan Labe on
Brussels says that this isn't okay anymore.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Where does it say that? How do we know that? So, and on top of that, who do you challenge? How do you fight something like that? You can't fight it. You can't fight a blank page. But
yeah,
as Canadians, I mean, what process do we have to challenge the UN?
Well, yeah.
I'm going to need a bigger helicopter.
I mean, we'd run it up the flag and get our leader to do that. But seeing as he's vying for a shiny trophy from them, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, and again, not being a legal beagle, I just wonder what would happen to something like this in court. Because you say, well, what does this law mean? You can't pass something that doesn't say. Every other law, exactly like you were saying, lays out the penalties, the schedules, the enforcement, all that. And it's just
the thing is our legal system has become so politicized that depending on the ruling party at the time, that determines on the legal outcome, which is far from what the legal system is intended to be, but that's what we have today.
Yeah, well, hey, who knows? Maybe we'll all end up at The Hague for a human rights tribunal for, trying to import some guns into this country or something, or get some wooden furniture with Mulan labia, as Tim likes to say, engraved on.
Yeah, imagine that. Come and take it. Oh, and they did.
Yeah.
That backfired, yeah.
But the thing that worries me, I mean, firearms and ammunition are fairly clear, and that's relatively easy. It's when you get into, obviously, for like what we're doing, the accessories, and then on top of that, like when you get into materials that are can be used in manufacturing, things like molds, dyes, castings, things like that. I mean, so when you don't have a clear idea of those parts, because a good example of that is with ITAR. I mean, in the US, they don't consider 80% receivers as firearms, yet they're still controlled under ITAR. You can't export them even though they're not firearms, so they're still, by their law, controlled good. And when you get into that, then if that's not a clear path, it's like, okay, well, we've got a set of molds that we're going to import from wherever, or something like that, or extrusions and things like that. It's at what point does an extrusion for a handguard start to become a firearm part? And that, if you don't have clarity on that, then you're taking a very large risk as a business.
Right. And so on that point, so in this Bill C-47, they're now adding the term technology. So now it's transfer and brokering of goods and technology, and the definition that they kind of have in here. So technology includes technical data, technical assistance, and information necessary for the development, production, or use of an article. that's included in the export control list. So if this is any sort of information, anything that can be used with or used alongside of a controlled good, then that now also becomes a controlled good.
Well, I mean, that could be enough
Now,
reason to bar people from entering the country too, right? Like if they have knowledge of how to build certain things because of their previous occupation or whatever, I mean, that could be a reason to say, oh, you can't come into the country because, you know, the knowledge you have could create dangerous goods or whatever. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, but what about like things like mag holders? Now, is that something that's an accessory to a controlled?
Yeah. At what point is it a good or not a good, or is it controlled or not? There should be a schedule where these things are defined, and there isn't because this law is stupid.
Between ITAR and this UN nonsense, we're not going to be able to bring anything into this country.
Well,
the other thing is that I find is that the sort of the countries that are listed now in terms of like what countries they're allowed to import and export from, the minister now gets to make that decision.
Yeah. Yay, orders in council. How could that possibly go wrong?
The governor and council makes the decision, but it's based on the recommendation from the minister. So the minister now can just say, nothing from China. Lose our Norinkos and cheap ammo and SKSs and everything like that.
Not the SKSs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey,
don't worry, there's millions still in the country.
Yep.
Yeah. You'll be okay for a little. You'll be okay for a little bit.
So something with the SKSs or any other example, the arms that we're bringing in or exporting for that matter, with the marking scheme they're planning on regulating, I foresee that causing additional increases to the price on firearms because everything is going to have to be marked, and I don't see a lot of manufacturers doing that unless they're required to at the point of origin, which they already do with their serialization and manufacturing roll stamps. So unless they also have to add...
So, I mean...
The arms trade, or per the arms trade treaty, it can't be done at the point of manufacture. It has to be done at import. So it has to be done in Canada.
Yeah.
Well, yes. The whole point of this thing to be able to track guns that are going into like third world warlord hands, if they're not being tagged in China and the crate of SKSs doesn't make it to the importer in Canada, how are they going to get laser engraved that they came from China to Canada in 2017?
Yeah. Well, there's as I understand it, there's you can accede to certain points of the treaty, and there was a bit of back and forth, and for some reason, other countries have said, okay, at the point of if we're exporting firearms, then they need to be marked. So then when they're received at the point or their destination country, then people can see, like they can look at it and say, oh, okay, this is a Ukrainian SKS or something like that, right? Like you mentioned, that's the way to trace it back. But for some reason, Canada decided to go that extra step further and say, well, no, the marks have to be, in place at the point of importation. So, and you've got that time component to do it once the shipment lands.
And it's going to be horribly expensive.
That's the one that there's been a fair amount of debate on, and it's definitely an unnecessary expense, especially when it can be done at the point of export, for surplus firearms and things like that. I mean, the actual cost per. So I guess the good thing is that, as far as I understand it, they'll accept laser engraving, which is quite inexpensive. I mean, it's still a cost factor, but some of the numbers I've been hearing and which I believe, would be in that $25 to $35 per firearm for the engraving.
Okay, so here's a question though.
My $300 SKS went up 10%.
Well, yeah, on a $1,000 rifle.
What happens to the bluing where you just laser engrave?
Yeah, exactly.
You can't laser engrave without ruining the finish in that spot.
Well, but there's already numbers engraved on the friggin' thing. Like, I could see if you have some old rifle manufactured before it was serialized, that they would say, okay, You
Hey,
need to
leave
go
my
and get
cooey
this.
alone.
You need to go and get this serialized if you want to export it out of the country. Like it's already in the country, leave it. If you want to sell that or take it out of the country, then you need to do something with it. But and that expense falls on you as the person that owns it. But then that's your choice.
So again,
but otherwise,
to keep it or not.
it's retarded.
But if you look at like in the States, I think it was the Gun Control Act of '68 that. So anything that's imported into the U.S. needs to have importer marks, and it's been that way for a long time. So your precious Mauser 98, that's being imported into the U.S. needs to have Interarms of Florida, Cocoa Beach, Florida, roll marked onto it, and it's been that way for a long time in the U.S. Whereas in Canada we haven't had a similar, push to do that now. Is it required or not? That's debatable. I tend to think not, but it's not new.
And really, like if it was brought into the country legally, how does that help tracking it back? Like,
well, it doesn't. I mean, that's
the
whole joke about this is the laser engraving. So they say laser engraving is fine. You can laser engrave your importation marks. Well, I mean, a piece of 60 grit sandpaper and about 30 seconds, and I've got that laser engraving off, and I'm off to town. And all that's put on there is, whatever, CA17. That's it. What does that tell you? Oh, this came into Canada in 2017. That's super helpful. I'm going to go use the serial number now to find out where this actually came from.
That's what Gavin was saying earlier, is that, we already have, as part of the previous sort of Import-Export Act, the firearm serial numbers are recorded at import. So as soon as you can just look at the serial number of the firearm, it was imported into Canada on this year, on this date. Like, this information is already known, it's already there.
Yeah, that, I mean, the stores that you buy everything from are supposed to have a log of when serial numbers were, sold and brought into the store and all of that sort of backdoor gun registry nonsense. So
the ledger, the ledger.
Well, the fact that fact of the matter is, and that's what nobody's talking about, is not one single crime or illegal act will be prevented by this. I mean, there's zero to gain, zero to gain. So.
Well, I mean, if I buy a length of pipe in the right length to make a Sten gun, are they going to make that be serialized when it comes into the country too? Like, I mean, where are they going to draw the line? And things like that.
Yeah. Well, that's
right. Like,
that's more where I take it from, because like under ITAR, again, you can't from the U.S. to Canada export things that are non-firearms. And of course, some of the accessories they're controlled, but even things like I said, foraging. Like, at what point, in the U.S. legally 80% it's a firearm. So if we're at 50%, is that a firearm or what? So it's that kind of gray area that I think really hurts the industry, and then will very soon after that hurt the public. The consumers,
Maybe we need to open up a company in the U.S. that makes 10% lowers and then sell. It's basically just a block of steel and that's it. Like, here you go.
I mean, you can buy forgings. You can buy forgings, and there's you can complete a forging without too much difficulty, really.
Yeah.
I've got about 1,500 pounds of 0% lowers that showed up today. If you guys are interested.
Sweet, yeah.
If you've got a milling machine that I can borrow, I'm all in. Let's make some lowers.
Yeah, we can make.
Did you actually? You brought in forgings?
No, we haven't yet. We've been looking at it, but it's the forgings that we were looking at were less than 80%, and they weren't coming from the U.S. But
definitely. A forging is less than 80%. 80% still has a lot of the your mag wells is routed out already and things like that.
No,
on a forging, it's a solid block that's in a lower shape.
Yeah, exactly. So, but at what point is that a firearm or firearm related part or controlled good. I mean, it's stuff like that I think this is really gonna muck up, but
So I want to go back and look at one thing that we sort of just started touching on. That was the registration. Gavin mentioned about the ledgers that retailers keep still. My understanding with this new act is that the importers will be required to keep a list of serial numbers that they received and when, as well as the information on who the importer into Canada then sells the firearm to subsequently.
So a gun registry.
Well, Marty and I were kind of talking about this before, and I thought originally it didn't sound much different than a ledger, and then Marty said Wolverine Supplies, and I'm like, oh yeah, they're also an importer. I forgot. So does that mean that if I buy a gun that Wolverine Supplies is imported and I'm the end user and a retail customer, do I end up on the list as the person who bought that from the importer? Because then
Yes.
it is a de facto gun registry.
Yeah.
well, yeah, they'll so anything that comes in, they'll be able to, tactical imports brings in, whatever.
I believe they
BRS
import
99
the SAP 6.
SAP 6, and then that gets sold to, Bullseye.
Whoever will buy it after the fact when the first person realizes that it doesn't run.
I'd personally rather have a Dominion Arms, but so then that's tracked to the retailer, and then the retailer and then has to. So they're just completing the loop because the retailer has to record your PAL in their ledger whenever they sell anything. But there's no way for them broadly to get to those retailers. So if they find a gun used in a crime scene and it's, let's say it's an SKS. I mean, who brought it in? We don't know. And we'd have to literally pull every single gun store across the country to see where this was bought. Now they won't have to do that. So they are completing a loop, I guess. But
yeah, and that's why there's stores I refuse to shop at that do that stupid recording my PAL nonsense, because unless I'm buying ammo, there's no obligation for them to do that.
No, the other way around. There's no obligation to record it for ammo. There is an obligation for them to record it on a firearms purchase.
When did
Marty's
that change?
Right. No, Marty's right. You only have to show up PAL to buy ammo. It's not recorded. They have to record the sale of the firearm in the ledger to make the CFOs happy.
Correct.
Yeah,
No, but
even
maintain a ledger.
At a retail store?
At a retail store.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Even before all this bullshit started, I mean, back in the 90s, you walked into a gun store and you bought a gun, or you brought one in for consignment or whatever, then they had the big ledger book.
Yeah, the big green
they'd
book.
open up and they'd write in your name and your
Right,
FAC number, and then probably that book would, get filed in the dumpster,
So Gavin, if you know of a realtor that's not doing that, don't dox them here.
I won't
Don't name names, but
Don't name names.
I'll tell you guys privately after. But no, every time I go in to buy ammo, they write everything down. But I go to this particular.
That's not necessary.
That is not necessary. They have to verify that you have one, but they don't have to record it. And then some retailers take that further and they say you need to show me your PAL and you need to show me your driver's license.
Yeah, so Canadian Tire does PAL and driver's license, but everywhere else that I've gone to buy ammo, they record my PAL. But there's a few places I've been that they do not record my PAL for my gun purchases, which is why I like going there.
Yeah,
I won't name names, but
I would say that with the exception of, I'll say Sale. Sale records my PAL information if you buy ammo there. Every other retailer that I shop at, that's a face-to-face retailer, they do not record my PAL info for buying ammo.
Well, we'll trade names, and then that way we.
Yeah.
But there's, that's the other great one that you see constantly people saying is like, I buy a fair amount of powder, and there's no regulations on powder.
Yeah, reloading for the win.
Other than I think you have to have less than 98 pounds in a
net explosive quantity.
clapboard dwelling or something like that. But
it's more than that, isn't it? I remember figuring it out one time, and it was a ridiculous amount.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah, I've got by the furnace, so I'm not sure how much is there.
Yeah, a buddy of mine shoots flintlock muskets. Doesn't even have his gun license.
Yeah,
doesn't need it.
Don't have to. And that's a contentious one when you like. And again, I won't name any names, but when you go to any of the online sites or anything like that, and you order powder and primers, and they ask you to upload your PAL, it's like, no, you don't have to. But you can't fault them for trying, or maybe trying to cover their ass or something like that.
Cover it themselves, yeah.
No, and for an online place, it's maybe a little easier to just do that because it's built into the system and whatever. But like if it's in person, but
still, if you buy a powder at a place like Canadian Tire, they're going
that's why I don't shop there anymore. Yeah, I don't shop there anymore.
So I did want to touch on this electronics records things from the verbiage of within this report, because I mean there are some online videos and some threads on certain Canadian gun enthusiast websites that I think there's some misinformation about this whole recording of information. And specifically, some of the things that I've seen says that, electronic records are required and must be, it's basically accessible from the CFO. So the CFO has, remote access to all of this information. And so they could basically create a database of this type of thing. So in this bill, it's, every person or organization that's required to keep a record and that does so electronically, that all equipment and software necessary to make the record intelligible are available during the retention period required for the record. So if the retailer is a smaller retailer that's still keeping sort of paper records of this information, they're not required to set up an electronic database accessible by the CFO. And from this, nor do I see, if they're keeping an electronic one, that it needs to be remotely accessible to the CFO, just that if they come looking for them, it needs to be in a format that, which they can, or they need to be able to provide the methods for decoding the information that they've collected.
Yeah. Again, though, if it's not under if it's not under the Firearms Act, then you're not necessarily required to immediately disclose that to anyone. I mean, I haven't dug into that, but if you have a firearms business license,
this is just the Import-Export Act. So I mean, it's your import anything that falls under, including that weird vague technology description. Now, you need to keep track of what's been imported, what's been exported, and that information needs to be held. But it doesn't necessarily need to be on like an accessible database that the government can access and things like that, which is, I think, has been somewhat reported in certain venues. Yeah.
Well, of course. I mean, people are gonna, they're gonna, be concerned with that sort of data and things like that. And that just kind of leads into, not leads into, but that strikes at the heart of this is, what exactly is this whole thing preventing or doing? I mean, all it's doing is making small businesses' lives more complicated. Shooting sports enthusiasts, it's making their lives more complicated. Wow. But it's not doing anything to slow down, the tin pot dictators or the arms industry, and
But I mean, small business owners are just a tax shelter. So, they're trying to improve the quality of the middle class. So they've got to shut down us small business owners.
Yeah, pretty much.
And this is entirely burdensome owners themselves. Like this is essentially, the government has come through and saying, you guys need to do all of this so that we can meet our commitments.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, the arms industry out of like China is huge, and they have no problem supplying everyone and anyone. And that's where the impetus for this arms arms control or trafficking in arms and stuff like that. It's like, did you ever see that movie Lord of War with Nicolas Cage? I mean, that's that's what they're trying to prevent, and I can understand that. And if you watch that movie, you see why the law is written the way it is. Nicolas Cage is standing on the deck of that boat, and whatever, Ethan Hawke is the agent. He gets on the boat and says, I caught you with this, Hind 24 attack helicopter going to Africa. And he's like, I got you, dead to rights. And Nicolas Cage is like, well, actually, the destination for this helicopter is separate from the destination from all the rockets sitting next to it, and we have end user agreements from everyone, blah, 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 blah. And then Ethan Hawke has to skulk away, because he couldn't get his man, even though this weapon was headed to a conflict zone. And then this law does nothing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they had the same thing in War Dogs, where they're not allowed to fly the cargo, so they have to drive it across the desert and everything. That was another brilliant movie.
Yeah, that's a great movie.
Oh yeah, no.
And here's the thing. These guys, like the guys that are actually running, weapons, that are supplying weapons to people that we don't want them, or that as a society or civilians, we don't want these people having weapons and things like that. Rogue. They're doing it with full knowledge and support of the governments who are, shouting out against them.
Yeah.
Oh, the state actors, for sure. Yeah.
Exactly. Like, this isn't going to stop those people, because those people have a lot higher powers supporting them.
Oh, yeah. And they're going to sell, like, the government is telling them not to do it. They're selling to them as well. So,
well, exactly. They're selling through these guys.
Prime example that popped up, and this was actually in the news last week, is the Chinese company that sold all the missile carriers to North Korea. And, North Korea's beating his chest and firing missiles into the sides of hills and stuff like that. And, there's the actual name of a Chinese company, which I can't pronounce, was on the side of one of these trucks. And, it was kind of in the news. They went back to China, and China said, no, dual use, which means, obviously this truck is sold for civilian purposes. And once we sell it to North Korea, which is, within our rights and treaty obligations and stuff like that, if they then convert it to a missile carrier, it's not on us.
Yeah.
And it's just like...
It's like that poor guy who had the plumbing company. Okay. His truck ended up in, Afghanistan being driven by ISIS.
In Libya.
With ISIS promotional
12.7. Yeah. Ed's Plumbing at Lafayette.
Yeah.
But that sort of stuff, this law is not going to do anything to stop that, because it's state actors that are pushing this, right? So
that's why us non-state actors need to step up our game, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
Which was our shooting team name for a little bit.
It just seems like this is the UN trying to flex their non-muscles.
It is. It 100% is. This is the UN's little collection of dictators getting together to enforce their will over other people.
Well, they can enforce their will on us because we obey the law, So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Final closing thoughts on the arms trade treaty?
Defund the UN and let's just get out of it. Problem solved.
Balance the stupid fucking budget.
Yeah. I don't know what to say. I mean, hopefully that next conservative government would have, the guts to cancel this because of the burden on legitimate businesses. I mean, that's really all we can hope for.
And again, this is one of those things where the conservative government had at least two. Did they have three opportunities to end this?
It was three opportunities.
Three opportunities to end this.
Yeah.
And they kept delaying it, and they tried to use this as a carrot to get people to vote conservative. But I mean, it's difficult to hold something as a carrot after you've refused to give it to someone three times over.
Yeah. That, and for all those listeners that say we don't ever criticize the conservatives, this is one of those times where we most definitely do.
Yeah, when they fucked up, we'll criticize them.
Yeah.
All right. My closing thought is physically remove them.
There you go.
United Airlines style.
United Airlines style. All right.
Yeah.
The regular show can be found on YouTube Monday night at 9:00. We have we have a website, CanadianPatriotPodcast.com, and we're on Facebook, Facebook.com/Canadian Patriot Podcast. If you want to send feedback to the show, feedback at CanadianPatriotPodcast.com. For all our listeners out there in podcast land, remember, you are the true north, strong and free.